Under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide.
Guys, I don't know if you have seen that. Have you seen the development coming from Gaza? Israel has defied International Court of Justice. Yes, a rogue state has defied the order of a UN court, the topmost court in the world. Israel has zero respect for that court. You know what happened 3 days ago, 4 days ago? The International Court of Justice specifically ordered Israel to halt its military operation in Rafah. But what Israel does, Israel has continued to commit massacre, and right now, as I speak, more than 45 people have been brutally massacred by Israel. Brutally. And they include babies whose heads have been taken off because of the power of the blast, the bombing. And I will talk about the disingenuous coverage of the BBC, who you and I fund. But let's just remind ourselves what happened in the last few days. So, International Court of Justice made it absolutely clear, set out 3 conditions for Israel to fulfill straight away. And the topmost was that Israel must not carry out any military offensive in Rafah.
Under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Now, what Israel has done is in gross violation of International Court of Justice, which is a UN court. Now, I think this is time that international fraternity who stand with humanity must make sure that Israel is expelled. Else, they leave the United Nations on their own. I think United Nations, there is absolutely no meaning of United Nations if a rogue state like Israel is allowed to continue, is allowed to remain a member, despite having zero respect for the United Nations or its affiliated bodies. You know what happened only a few days ago? A clown, brain-dead, robotic US President Joe Biden, what was he saying from the podium inside the White House? That what is happening in Gaza is not genocide.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection. But let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide.
Dear Joe Biden, I know you are brain dead, but can you still say, in the face of these visuals which are coming from Gaza, can you still say that this is not genocide? What is it? What is it then? Now let's talk about the media coverage. The incident happened last night. The social media was flooded with gory visuals coming out from Rafah. And the BBC, who you and I fund with billions of pounds, did not report it until this morning. Yes, the total strength of BBC workforce is more than 20,000 staff. More than an organization with more than 20,000 staff did not know what was happening in Rafah. Because the children or the babies who were being massacred were not Israelis. That's why BBC's editorial ethics did not prompt them to cover this story. And when they covered it in the morning, you can see how disingenuous they have been. I want you to read this online piece. Look at the headline. Look at the headline. Reported killed. BBC has series of stingers in Gaza. And yet, and it is carrying out the visuals in support of that headline. And yet the headline says reported. So much caution compared to the headline that BBC publishes about alleged Hamas rocket attacks, where there is no attribution or no caution. It's full of conviction that it was indeed Hamas rocket attacks, because BBC reporter was there at the site from which the Hamas was launching those rockets. All throughout, he is so cautious. Every death figure, every casualties coming from Gaza is rightfully, very cautiously attributed to Hamas-run health ministry. But similar stuff coming from Israel is full of conviction. Absolutely no attribution by the BBC. No attribution. Because Thomas McIntosh was standing in Israel when things were happening. So he could see from his own eyes. So there is no need for attribution. BBC was not this bad. It was bad during my time, but not this bad. This is like they're not even pretending. Now fast forward, there was a news element on BBC News broadcast, and exactly the same two elements. Look at the wording. It's Hamas-run health ministry versus conviction from the reporter and the news presenter about Hamas rocket attacks.
It's Monday, the 27th of May. Our main story, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says 35 people have been killed and dozens injured in an explosion at a refugee camp near Rafah.
The Israel Defense Forces says it has carried out an airstrike targeting a compound where senior Hamas officials had gathered. It says it is reviewing the incident after reports that civilians had also been harmed.
Well, our correspondent Dan Johnson is in Jerusalem for us this morning. Dan, what more do we know, particularly about the impact on civilians?
Yes, we know at least 35 people have been killed after this airstrike, the explosion and the fire that ripped through an area that was being used to shelter displaced Palestinians, thousands of them living there in tents, having been moved from their homes by the fighting, the conflict in Gaza. The Israeli military says that this was a targeted strike, a precision strike, using precision weapons against a legitimate target, Hamas fighters, two of them that it says were killed in this, and that the strike inadvertently started a fire which then spread to the tents, and that's why civilians have been caught up in this. It says it is investigating the circumstances of the incident, but Hamas says this was an airstrike on an area that had been designated as a safe humanitarian zone where displaced people were living. Now, it comes after Hamas fired rockets earlier yesterday at central Israel, the first time Tel Aviv and that area had come under attack since January. That didn't cause any serious damage or casualties. Most of the rockets were intercepted by Israel's air defense systems. But this does jeopardize potential negotiations to reach a ceasefire, which had been hoped to start as early as tomorrow, mediated by Egypt and Qatar. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been under increasing pressure to change his military strategy. The Israeli public is calling for more results in terms of getting hostages back to their families and the eradication of Hamas. And he faced the ruling from the International Court of Justice on Friday, ordering a halt to the military offensive around Rafah. But that has continued over the weekend. The health ministry in Gaza says the death toll since the start of this conflict has now passed 36,000 people.
My goodness, what a number. Dan, with the latest from Jerusalem, thank you.
Now, what is happening in Gaza is genocide, war crimes. International Court of Justice has said that. Now, look at these visuals. Now, what was this clown Nigel Farage was saying on Sky News? That the people who are protesting against this madness, against this war crimes, are people who don't stand with British values. So therefore, he was equating that committing war crimes are what, according to him, British values.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are.
Do you agree with him? Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.